there's a deep relationship between the feet, the knees, and the hip joint. So if you step the feet about, let's say, hip width apart, and then allow the inner arch of your right foot to collapse, so the outer edge of the foot comes up. Notice how the knee has gone into the midline. So there's adduction at the hip joint as the thigh bone follows along. And now if we push down through the outer edge of that foot, we're more in neutral, then we keep on going, allowing the inner edge to come up, and suddenly we're in outward rotation at the hip joint. Neutral, inward rotation, neutral, outward rotation. What happens when we go into a twisting pose is that we actually allow this little bit of adduction at the hip, but it's very temporary. So to get my arm outside of the leg in a deep twist, I'm going to allow my knee to cross the midline, and then I'm taking my left arm outside of the knee. A lot of times in a squatting position, like if you take a low lunge for instance, because people are so used to hugging the midline for forward folds as they've been instructed, we often see that their glutes are weak, and as a result, the knee comes kind of forward and collapses into the midline. And so a common cue is keep your knee over your ankle, but that doesn't really do anything about the hip hike. The right cue is drawing back through the hip, which is where a teacher's assist could pull the hip back and guide the other leg into an inner spiral. And in that context, I could let my knee go all the way past the ankle while still drawing back through the hip joint. So what I'm getting here is more and more knee flexion, but I'm not necessarily getting deeper hip flexion. I'm constantly drawing my hip back into extension. I'm bending my knee caves in. I draw back through the hip. That slightly draws the knee back, but once I can do that, it's totally fine to bend the knee all the way if that feels comfortable with my lower back. And so the assist that I would give someone is standing behind them, I would guide their left leg into an inward spin, draw back through their right hip, and then say, okay, keep bending your knee as much as you're comfortable. And that's the same movement pattern that's used in order to do really good back bends. But of course, it's a very hard place to train it. We have to train the inward rotation of the back leg in a lunging position first, while addressing the outward rotation of the front leg. So all these poses are interconnected on some level. But to simply try the intermediate pose or the big back bend wouldn't make any sense unless there was some period of training towards it, whether it be for a few months with a really good teacher and some kind of strict alignment parameters, or maybe even a few years of regular practice. For myself, I had to wait after about 3 years of pretty consistent, strong daily practice before I could attempt poses like wheel, because I didn't have the proper rotations in the pelvis, this inward spin to neutral. I would simply splay my legs out and squeeze my glutes and hope for the best. And we're often taught to squeeze our glutes now in modern day culture, but it needs to be coupled with the emphasis on inward spin to create a big lift of the heart, and then the glutes can contract in a way that supports the body. Because I didn't have the proper rotations in the pelvis, this inward spin to neutral, I would simply splay my legs out and squeeze my glutes and hope for the best. And we're often taught to squeeze our glutes now in modern day culture, but it needs to be coupled with the emphasis on inward spin to create a big lift of the heart, and then the glutes can contract in a way that supports the body. So let's look more at the front leg in a standing pose. This is something that shows up more often than not, and it's based on the same principles as low lunges. I'm ready for my close-up. So imagine someone in downward dog. They lift their right leg, and then they're taught to step between the hands. So they throw their body kind of forward to actually get between the hands, and then back foot flat. Look what's happened here. Because I've tried so hard to step forward now, my feet are so wide, I can't control this range of motion. I can't get any movement in my pelvis. As a result, what will often happen, if there's any kind of tightness around the inner thighs or even the hips, people's knees will get pulled into the midline. So instead of going and drawing someone's knee towards the little toe, I would instead look at the back foot and instruct the student to step a little bit closer. And then lift the toes and spiral the leg in. And now we can actually move the whole pelvis a little bit more towards the front foot. Not to say that we're squaring the hips forward, but a movement in that direction, drawing back through the right hip. And then it can become a great back bend that even creates a bit of a stretch in the left hip flexor as the buttock contracts, as opposed to being so wide that the knee is pulled inwards, and then there's some strange stresses that are put on the hip joint or the back knee, or very commonly the lower back. So if you're experiencing any of those discomforts, try shortening your stance. You can also work with stepping forward differently. From downward dog, you can still lift the right leg, right foot behind the hand, back foot steps closer, angling towards the front corner of the mat. Before you come up, you're going to draw back through your right hip by squeezing your heel towards the back of the mat, externally rotating the hip a little bit. You can even use your hand to push back on the hip crease, and then dropping the tail and roll up through the vertebra. This is all we're looking for, and then the arms are a bonus. So if you work with the pose that way, as opposed to lifting the leg, stepping between the hands literally, and then flattening the foot, notice the difference. Here I can't really control it. My pelvis is forced to turn over here. When I shorten the stance, I can draw back through my right hip, which actually turns my pelvis more forward, and then enter the pose. Another very effective way to get into Warrior One that I like to teach most people, instead of lifting your right leg, let's lift our heels up and look at the belly button engaging the core. From there, we step the right foot behind the hand, and then step the left foot in closer, about 45 degrees, like you did before. Squeeze the heels towards each other, drawing back through the right hip, and then roll up through the vertebra. Lift the arms, and the head is the last thing to come up. And that's really the key movement for me, is connecting to the glutes, drawing back through the hip, and then expanding upwards from that rooting. Inhale, lift the arms. Exhale, fold forward. Camera one. Inhale to look up. Exhale, chaturanga. Slight bend in the arms. Inhale to up dog. Exhale, down dog. Right foot forward, back foot flat. Camera two. Inhale to roll up, warrior one. And exhale to chaturanga. Inhale, upward dog. Exhale, down dog, left foot forward. Inhale, roll up to warrior one. Exhale, chaturanga. Inhale, up dog. And exhale, curling into down dog. And breathe. It's our last one. So really turn on the pose, drawing the inner thighs back until the legs are parallel neutral. And then imagine you were squeezing something in between the legs, activating the inner thigh muscles. And then to close the pose off, press your heels towards each other, contracting the buttocks. Dropping the tail a little bit more. So instead of stretching the hamstrings, it's more about focusing on the breath and moving it to different parts of your spine. One more breath. Long exhale, bend the knees, look thumbs. Inhale, jump. Exhale, fold in. Bending the knees. Inhale to chair pose. Exhale, samasthitihi.